Happy to be your moderator for this panel, Creating a Just Transition and Healthy Neighborhoods. I must say, as one of the co-founders of CEJA, I'm incredibly pleased and proud to see all of you here. It's sort of what we dreamed about many years ago. And I'm glad to be here with all of you and looking forward to celebrating CEJA's 15th year anniversary. So as Amy mentioned, the Green Zones campaign is one of CEJA's core campaigns in which CEJA members and partners are advancing place-based strategies to transform areas overburdened by pollution into healthy, thriving neighborhoods, whether they are in urban, rural, or suburban areas. As CEJA has been developing our work across the state of California and have been promoting it beyond, several of our organizations have intersected with efforts to foster a just transition. Have folks heard about a just transition? Yeah, I see some hands. Yeah, we'll be talking about it. And there's also a workshop this afternoon, so you'll be well informed. The just transition concept is rooted in the environmental justice movement's work with labor to bring together fence-line communities impacted by polluting industries and frontline workers in those industries to transition to clean production and sustainable economy. It is used more broadly now to describe the movement for real solutions to the climate crisis, that is, and to transition from an exploitative, extractive, fuel-based economy to a resilient local living economy that meets the needs of the people and the planet. The panel today are three expert EJ movement climate justice leaders. We'll be talking about the work on the ground that they're doing that are examples of how community-led solutions relate to green zones, but also the just transition framework. Both of these frameworks are premised on the need for comprehensive, community-led solutions that address the fundamental issues that our communities, our economy, and our environment face. Our panelists will discuss and share their work, the intersection of creating green zones and fostering a just transition based on the dynamic successes that they've had on the ground. And folks will be talking about the work that's happening in the area of San Diego, here in Los Angeles, and also in Richmond, California. So our first panelist, I have low bios, although I feel like I don't need them. Everyone knows these people, right? But nonetheless, for those of you that don't. Keep it moving?
Yes.
Okay.
They can read all about it.
Okay. So Diane Tedmorian, I'll say two things. So Diane is one of the co-founders as well of CEJA. And she is with the Environmental Health Coalition, has been with the Environmental Health Coalition since its founding in 1980. And the last thing I'll say is that she was appointed to the California Air Resources Board. As our EJ rep.
Appointed official who wants to be held accountable. That's me. So I need you guys keep telling me. So if we could go 2 slides, and I'll move as quickly as possible here. I want to say happy anniversary to CEJA and add my congratulations. And since we're doing a little 15-year anniversary, I wanted to pull out a slide that some people might recognize. And I also want to give a shout out to really we're so happy to have Tiffany here, and we are so thrilled that Amy has been driving Green Zones for as long as she has, and she will recognize this slide because she did it. And I want you to just take a look at this. I'm not going to go through it, but to say these were our original reasons why we started Green Zones, and I think, next slide, you'll see that this is what we're facing. This is what we're facing in our communities in Barrio Logan. Next slide. And this is why. Because our kids are at risk, and we are desperately looking for healthy communities for our children. Next slide. Here in San Diego, here's a slide about San Diego where you can see what the high asthma rates are. Next slide, please. That in Barrio Logan and National City, City Heights, we have up to 3 times higher asthma rates than in the county nationwide, or countywide, excuse me. Next slide. And these are all the sources of pollution from trucks from the port, from plating shops, from ships at the port, and from accidents that happen because we have discriminatory land use practices that are occurring in our communities. Next slide. And so green zones didn't start with Ceja. Ceja started in green zones in our communities where people like these were saying we don't want toxics in our community. We want decent planning. We want good, healthy communities. Next slide. And so we created this vision from all of you, from all of the communities that you are in, from all of the community planning meetings and the community meetings that we've had. And I think, without going again through every single one of them, we are kicking it. We are accomplishing a lot of this. So I think a huge round of applause. And while we don't yet have a federal designation for neighborhoods, we have CalEnviroScreen. We have a statewide designation for environmental justice communities, whatever you want to call it. That's what it is. And we are thrilled to know that monies are going to our communities, more resources are going to our communities, and that was one of the key goals that we had early on. So I just want us to look back and say we really are accomplishing that. Next slide. And next slide. And this is one of the reports that started it all back in 2003, and Martha Matsuoka is here, who is the author of this. This is what we took to Cal EPA when we were on the first Environmental Justice Advisory Committee and said that essentially green zones, community planning, cumulative impacts analysis were all things that we wanted to get accomplished. So we put the roots of green zones before we even knew to call it green zones right there. So next slide. And then we all marched. I don't want to ask who was there because I'm afraid I won't get much of a shout out, but there's some of us, hey? Yeah? Carly, you were there? No? Yeah? Okay. Antonio, okay. But we marched. This was really the first time we had a statewide march for environmental justice, and we won the policies in that report. And then, next slide, we went on to create this report, next slide, and then this report, which we all see, and it's on our website now. Next slide. And again, we've identified environmental justice communities. This is our slide in San Diego showing where the impacts are the greatest. Next slide. Now I'm going to move on for like 4 slides. So next. I don't have enough time for all this. So again, sources. So there's 2 green zones that I want to talk about here. So there's a little history about green zones across the state. Barrio Logan and National City are 2 of the green zones that we are working on in San Diego. And really driving green zones is community-driven land use and really correcting discriminatory land use practices. So here, like many of your communities, we have mixed-use zoning where we have polluters that are located right next to homes and schools. Next slide. So community comes together and says, this is the core. We have to separate industries from residential and school areas. Next. So we come up with a new plan. And this is something that I think all of you are very familiar with. Everyone's now engaged in community planning, and that wasn't true 20 years ago. We didn't understand that planning was a key tool. We learned that from Poder, and we were able to use that, I think, really effectively in creating this plan. Next slide. And protecting residents and also protecting industries and jobs. Next slide. Next slide. Skip that story. And getting new affordable housing in Barrio Logan, which has been really important and is one of the, I think, symbols of what we can do in our neighborhoods that really improves life and avoids displacement and gentrification. Next slide. Now in National City, similar circumstance where we have mixed-use zoning. Next slide. And we have auto body shops, about 28, 30 of them that are within a very short distance, about a mile between the school and the auto body shops. Next slide. So it looks something like this, a lot like communities you're from. We have instances like this where on a Sunday morning residents are woken up by an explosion that fortunately didn't harm anyone because no one was in the shop working. And fortunately, except for, of course, the respiratory hazards that folks experienced as a result of this. this building burned to the ground. Next slide. So again, one of the core principles is community members being engaged and at the core of setting these plans. Next slide. So in 2010, National City adopted the West Side Specific Plan, which straightened out the zoning, said that we need to go back to zoning 101, where we have residential, commercial, and industrial zones. And we have those for a good reason, because we're going to have pollution from industrial zones, from industrial uses, and it doesn't belong next to homes and schools. Core principle was to provide affordable housing, and core principle was to protect the one natural resource that we have in National City, and that is Paradise Creek. Next slide. Next slide. And a key element here that Catalina Martinez is here, and she's our phenomenal advocate with National City and can tell you all about this in depth. This law is one of the first in the country that actually phases out the polluters. One of the frustrations that we've had is that we're faced with grandfathering, which would mean that all the polluters or the bad uses get to stay in a community, so a community doesn't get better. We got to correct communities. We got to make them better today for the people who live there today, and not wait for developers to come in to decide that this is valuable property that they want to develop. Next slide. And so, let's skip this. And so one of the things that we think is important is that the jobs and economic income of these uses stays in the community. So our idea is that we would set up a green industrial park that the industries that are phased out could move to. So we've done an extensive study, which you can learn more about. Next slide. With the help of the Brownfields area-wide planning program to try to create a green industrial park in the industrial side of National City, so that we can retain that economic interest and those jobs, and hopefully ensure that we keep those polluters out of the core part of National City. Next slide. And then Paradise Creek. We talked about this is our natural resource that we really want to protect. We identified the area that's on the right of your slide as a place for 201 affordable homes. Next slide. And we're laying it out this way so that on the bottom right, you see the homes are coming in. We'll have a community garden, a park that will come in. And next slide. We were able to actually access the first affordable housing dollars from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, $9 million, in order to create these affordable homes. So we think this is really the vision of green zones that is so important for us to put forward, and we're excited about this. And the last thing I'll say, next slide, thanks, next slide. And we're building it. Next slide. Well, actually, I do want to say, can you go back one? Sorry, I'm beyond time. But the SB 1000 that is being promoted by all of CEJA started in part because of the passage of the environmental justice element in National City and then in Jurupa. And so we have these local examples that are driving. This is part of Green Zones as well. And then last, I'll say we do have a resource with a video and a curriculum that you can use that talks about community-driven planning. So thank you so much. Green Zones is a very important, I think, strategy for all of us to use, and so is Just Transition. So I think that's what we're transitioning to now. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. So, thank you for sharing with all of us the history of Green Zone's work and your victories in Barrio Logan and National City. The next speaker is going to be Mia from. No,
I know Byron. Oh,
okay, sorry, mixed up. Some of the slides threw me off. A creature of habit. PowerPoints dictate our priorities sometimes. The next speaker is going to be Byron Iliad who is the Executive Director of Communities for a Better Environment. Byron has over 20 years history of community organizing on racial, educational, environmental, and economic justice issues. Prior to being the Executive Director at CBE, he was the Director of Organizing at the Sierra Club, where he worked with staff and members and allies to demand that people in low-income communities and communities of color have access to clean and renewable energy, industry, jobs, and careers. So, next, Byron.
Good morning, everyone. So I want to start just by acknowledging some folks in the room that had a huge role in what I've been asked to talk to y'all about. So I know that Marta's here somewhere. I saw her from Occidental College. I know that Yuki is also somewhere around here. There you go. Who really worked to get this work going and codified it and began to really shape it. And Daryl also, who's in the back copy line as well. And of course our two Wilmington organizers, Alicia, who's somewhere around here, and Ashley as well, who I'll talk about briefly in a second. And I also want to welcome all of our community members. One of the principles of Green Zones is community engagement. And so the fact that we do have so many members here, both from CBE and the other organizations, really is a testament to how committed we are to that part of our strategy. Also, our youth program is here, a couple of members of our youth program, and I'll talk about the link of our Kuga work and the youth program, Youth for Environmental Justice. One of the more important youth groups, actually, in LA and in the state, really, in the environmental justice movement. They've been around for about 18 years, and sometimes we talk about our members just, as a whole. But our youth program has been really consistently working on this stuff for years and years and years. All right. So, with that said, I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to talk quickly about history of our Kubu campaign, our Clean Up Green Up campaign. But I'm going to give some short points, some highlights, because you will hear a little bit more about that later on today. So you'll hear that more in depth from folks that are actually closer to that work than I have been, right? Folks that have actually done the organizing and the work for a little bit over a decade. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we won from the coalition perspective, but then I'm going to dive into Wilmington specifically, where CBE has been for over 2 decades really doing environmental justice work. All right, so since the beginning, this work has really been the work of a growing coalition of grassroots organizations, Liberty Hill Foundation, researchers, urban planners, tons of urban planners, and community members organized for a decade, around a decade, the better part of a decade, resulting in Kugu, the Clean Up Green Up, finally being passed on Earth Day earlier this year, which was a milestone for us, and also nationally, we got a ton of attention for that as well. And Clean Up Green Up really represents our vision, really not different than the vision that was put up on the screen by Diane earlier, right? And it really defines that. And it was rooted in that. And it comes out of also our cumulative impacts work. A lot of you all were involved in the cumulative impacts work early on with CBE and some other folks around here. I'm going to slow down. I can feel myself speeding up. And so, but it really is rooted in the idea that we need local land use policy to reduce the toxic threats in EJ communities and communities of color, right? And the overconcentration, thank you, the overconcentration of sources of pollution in those communities. And since the beginning, really, it's been about community-led organizing and base building. We've organized local businesses, community members, residents, elected officials along the way. Community members have been involved from day one in research, participatory research, and communications work, and policy analysis, and modeling, and of course in base building. Building a base around the vision of communities that are safe, healthy, while remaining culturally rich, right? I'm going to skip a couple parts here. So originally, our strategy was to organize the mayor and the mayor's office since the beginning, and become a beautiful, and CBE took the lead on that. And I know that Yuki was a huge part of helping to develop that strategy. But then that wasn't working. When that wasn't working too well, we decided to go to the mayor's boss, the city council. And so a couple of years into it, when we just kept spinning our wheels, we changed the strategy, and that strategy became a strategy to move specific or individual council, LA City Council members. And that strategy really worked. And in 2008, 2009, we worked with the City Council and drafted city ordinance. And then we won the support of, say, WISAD, the first council member that we won support for. And that was really the first domino, right? We went on to have secure the commitments and the support of other council folks. Wait, is that left or is that?
One is left.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna put this away then. All right, so and then in 2004, so that was in 2013. In 2013, a big milestone for our work. We got the city to hire a full-time staff person just to help us move this work forward. And the first thing that we asked the city staff person to do is to really convene a series of public participation sessions. And so those happened. There was 2 rounds of that. One in 2014 and 2015, with residents and business and other local businesses and local stakeholders as well. So that was sort of the strategy, and eventually, there was a lot of negotiation, and I'll talk about some of the challenges also below. But essentially, that sort of gives you a little bit of an overview of the background and some history. Again, you'll hear more a little bit later on today when we make a lot more noise about this and give you more details. And also, I will encourage you, there's a ton of folks here that have been involved in the Clean Up Green Up campaign at some point. I would encourage you, if you have questions about that, they know a lot more than I know. They've been on the ground doing the organizing and other work that's made this happen. So how we won, right? So the first thing is that there was strength in the coalition. There was a really strong coalition that had broad-based support. Again, local businesses, residents, right, and then outside of those communities as well. There was 3 communities that were part of the Clean Up Green Up. It was the Bacoima and Sun Valley, where Bacoima Beautiful organizes in. It was Boyle Heights, part of East LA, and of course Wilmington, which is a port community south of the city, part of LA City. But that coalition has always been rooted in community involvement, and that has been, again, present and part of our primary strategy for a while. So and then we also where our current mayor was a council person, we wanted support, and so when he became mayor, that was obviously really helpful. Right, and so that mayor ended up signing the policy on Earth Day this last April, which was really helpful to be able to carry over that support from a council person to our city's mayor. We had a really strong technical piece to our work, and so with support from USC and of course Occidental, I already mentioned Martha's role and her colleagues, was really helpful as well. And then we had just that broad-based coalition of over 200 health, environmental, labor, community organizations, local businesses, and then of course congressional members Dennis Hahn and Tony Cardenas, who were supportive. And so we just built this sort of wave of support. And of course Liberty Hill. They've been a partner and a funder since almost the beginning. For 7 years they scrapped together budgets for us, and we had a huge, we had a lot of support from the Liberty Hill Foundation, and you will hear from them later on today. But I think 2 factors, I'm going to finish with 2 factors that would really make this possible ultimately. One was that there was constant organizing and mobilizing of our neighborhoods. Postcards, petitions, organizational endorsement, community pressure on city targets, countless meetings that we went to and our members went to, a deep mobilization and participation in community workshops organized by the city, mobilization of community members, community pressure and visibility at City Hall, for instance, local businesses, ongoing leadership development of our members to ensure that that leadership continue to show up in our work. And second, continuous organizing in local issues. Like CBE, a lot of the organizations, grassroots organizations, have long histories in their communities. CBE has been in Wilmington for over 2 decades, and we continue to fight the bad. Which kind of leads me to just transition how Green Zones fits into our overarching just transition framework. And I'm going to stop there because I've been asked to.
1 more minute.
1 more minute. Okay, good. And so, let me see. What should I pick? Okay, so so our Green Zones work has really been part of our overarching just transition work, right? And so Wilmington is predominantly working class Latino community. We are surrounded by it's the third Wilmington sits on the third largest oil field reserve in the country. 3 major refineries, other industries. It's a port community. In fact, 40% of the country's imports come through Port of LA and Long Beach. And so our just transition is about moving away from an economy and a political system that depend and that incentivizes the fossil fuel industry. Establishing a green zone is a strong first stride moving toward that vision of an economy that is sustainable, that is inclusive, that is equitable, and a political system that prioritizes health, safety, and the well-being of community over profits. So, what's next for Kubu? As you all know, winning policy is it's sometimes the easiest part. Implementation is going to be a huge challenge for us and probably another decade's worth of work. And that's hard style.
Thank you, Byron. As Byron mentioned during our lunchtime period, we're going to be hearing more about the Clean Up Green Up campaign, celebrating the great victory. Also, if folks want to learn more about the green zones that Amy referenced at the beginning, the work that's happening up and down the state, the report is at the front table. And the last points that Byron mentioned are a good segue to our final panelist, Mia Yoshitani, who's the Executive Director of the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, APEN. Mia has been the Executive Director at APEN since 2013, although she's worked with the organization in different guises and phases over the history of APEN. APEN has been fighting and winning environmental justice struggles for the past 23 years and remains one of the most unique organizations in the country, explicitly developing the leadership and power of low-income Asian American and Pacific Islander immigrant and refugee communities. So last but not least, Mia.
All right.
Good morning, everyone. So I want to ask a favor, because I'm going to tweet this out and follow directions and do my social media thing. Can you put your fists in the air, please, for me? Yeah, that looks awesome. So, and that is what green zones and just transition and environmental justice is really about at the core. It's about power of the people, right? And it's about the winning, the victories that we need to keep our families safe and healthy and to meet the basic needs and the needs that we have in our communities to be able to thrive, right? That's what it's about. It's about building power to go from the extractive economy that's digging up coal and oil and burning it at the expense of all of our communities, of the energy system, of the labor system that extracts our labor from our communities, creates profit for an elite, is supported by white supremacy, supported by a system of consumerism, it's supported by a democracy that doesn't work. This is what we're doing. We're trying to make a transition away from the system that's killing us, right? And that's what just transition really is. A transition away from the system that's killing us to a new system that lives here in our hearts right now. That we already know where we're going. We're already imagining it. We're already recreating it. We're already actually moving it on the ground. As you heard from the stories from Diane and Byron, we're already doing this. We're already making this just transition. And I wanted to start there by really making sure we understand that what just transition is about people at the core. It's about people who have lived with the worst of the burden of this extractive economy, and it's about putting their needs front and center, and it's about a new generation where we can build the economy that we really want, that meets our needs, that meets the needs of our people. And we can't do that without building a movement, right? And that's what we're here for today. So just remembering like the core values of what we're doing here, we can talk about the technicalities of the policies, we can talk about the strategies, about civic engagement, how to build power and voice, the basis of all of our work, which is the real leadership development, the core organizing that we do every day. But that is all in service to winning what we really want. What we feel in our hearts is what our communities really need. So I just wanted to go simple. And we're going to learn more about just transition in workshops, and we're going to learn more about all of the technicalities and all of the great work that's happening around creating green zones. But I wanted to start with demystifying just transition. It's not, it really is, it's just a word that's a framework for telling this story about how we're getting from the system that's killing us to the system that we want. And that's all it is. And it's a framework and a story that's rooted in the work that you all have already been doing and the struggles that we've all been a part of. So it's rooted in environmental justice and real organizing around environmental justice, and it's rooted in the Green Zones work and also in the real work of putting workers who have been exploited by our dirty economy system, making sure that as we're transitioning away from fossil fuels, that our workers, not just in the fossil fuel industry, but across the board of the extractive economy, that our workers are taken care of too. It's about, and the workers, they're part of our communities, right? There's no separation. We don't, on the ground, we don't separate children from teachers or workers from community members. We're all in it together. We need to make sure that the workers who have been in these dirty industries and the communities who've been at the brunt of the worst of the extractive economy get to benefit, and in the front of the line to benefit from investing in our new economy and our new vision for what we really want. So that's what just transition is. And this is really hard to see, I know. So I do have like 30 copies of this slide if people want to have a look at it. Could you just pass that out? So yeah, the system that we're in is a system that concentrates wealth and power, that's dependent on white supremacy, it's dependent on extracting our labor. And just transition says that we fundamentally need to build power, build a movement of movements, to organize ourselves, to shut down the industries that are poisoning us, and create new industries where we're not repeating the system that was built before, but we're creating a new system that really values local wealth building, local ownership of our new systems, where those work is about quality jobs, and it's about recycling wealth in the community. It's about creating infrastructure that we need, which is all the lessons that we've been learning about the Green Zones work. It's creating wealth in our community, creating health in our community, creating self-determination in our community for us, right? We're shedding this old system that has done nothing for the people in our communities, and we're building a new one. What we know right now is that we're in a fight for our lives. We are in the middle of an economic crisis, an ecological crisis, and for sure, a crisis in democracy, where our voices are not valued. And we need to organize ourselves to change, not just to fight the bad stuff that's killing us, but to change the whole rules of the game, right? To change the whole story. Community farms, yep. Local food production. What else? Anyone working on affordable housing? Yeah. Anyone working on transportation that's accessible to low-income families? Yep. Anyone working on new clean energy systems that create local jobs? There we go. So you see, we're already doing this. We're already in motion in going from the system that's killing us to the new system that we want. But the thing is that we know that because of the crisis, the economic and the ecological crisis that we're in, we know that a transition is inevitable, right? There's transition happening all around us all the time. Our state's policies are directing us to reduce greenhouse gases, fundamentally putting billions of public dollars and private investment into that transition. So the transition is happening. The transition from the old economy to a just economy, a just transition is not inevitable, and it's something that we need to fight for with everything we've got. And Ceja, I'll just end on, is part of building the powerful movement that's rooted in our community vision for this living economy, that we need to make just transition real for all of our communities. So I'll end with that.